Good afternoon. We are now at our last session, and I know that people may be a little bit tired, but I think it's a very exciting topic, and I hope we will have some presentations from the speakers and then a conversation, a dialogue. The topic of this roundtable is cybersecurity, disinformation, hybrid threats. Are we really ready for the AI world? So it's a very broad topic, and we could, discuss for hours and have, even several panels on it. But I think that to put a framework in our discussion, the thing is that cybersecurity concerns, for instance, the states, as it is connected with hybrid warfare that can take several forms, and as state infrastructures are more and more relying on technology, these threats must be taken more seriously into account. It concerns the private sector and companies, as they can be the victims of such cyber attacks, but it concerns also our society at large, as disinformation can be used to undermine our democracies and manipulate citizens. And of course, this is connected also with issues of privacy, human rights, freedom of expression, legislation. And as AI is progressing, all these threats will become even more sophisticated through time. And as a region, we need to take the necessary initiatives for addressing these issues. And in this effort, we are very much related with the path to the European accession. This can help the different countries to harmonize their legislative system, but it's not enough. We have heard in the panels in the morning that many countries are not advanced enough in terms of the technical parameters of the infrastructure, but I would say that if we wait to, first of all, prepare this part, and we are not ready to address the threats in the future, it will be too late. We are already too late. Even in Europe, we are already too late in this aspect. So I think that this must become a priority, and not only in a negative way, because if we prepare our countries to address these different forms of threats, and we are also protecting at the same time our democracy and the human rights, then we can see the positive sides of technology that can be also very profitable for all of us. So we have a very interesting panel with very good speakers, and I will start with giving the floor to Minister Kuko, who is the Deputy Minister of Albania, to tell us a little bit how you see it from a governmental side, all these issues. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for the invitation to participate in this very important and interesting forum, and to also commend you on the composing of the forum with government, civil society, private sector, but also practitioners. Of course, this is a matter that doesn't belong to one sector only. It's a matter that belongs to the multi-agency approach, because it belongs to governments for the regulatory aspect of it. It belongs to the private sector for the developing aspect of it. It belongs to the whole society for the usage of this matter. However, I want to focus a little bit on the cybersecurity. And as you say, we are already late, because actually the thing is happening, and unfortunately the majority of the governments worldwide are not yet prepared to deal with that. And why do I say that? I say it because when it comes to the massive and huge contributions that technology brings to our society, on the other hand, we also open the door to a lot of phenomena which are quite, let's say, disruptive when it comes to the security. And here I'm mentioning the risks that come from cyber attacks. We do have a very fresh example from Albania. In July 2022, we had a massive attack to our governmental structures and also to our private sector. there was an attack which was carried on by the Iranian government, and now we have the proof about it, and it was quite a disruptive moment. So when something like this happens, how do you investigate that? How do we investigate this cybercrime? How do we have in place the measures, the legislatory measures, and also the appropriate tackling measures from the government to deal with that? So it's a matter that requires a lot of preparation also on the preparatory stage. And of course, that cyber does not recognize geographic boundaries, and I start by pressing the issue of, as I said, the cyber attack and the cyber crimes. In Albania, we have had quite a lot of digital shift when it comes to the last years, with most of state institutions offering the services online. And the private sector, particularly the banking industry, has also followed this trend. Consequently, we have vast amounts of data that are now available online, making various databases vulnerable and, of course, susceptible to cybercrime, to hackers, and to other malicious actors. Albania has faced during the last months, as I said, a persistent and increasingly sophisticated malicious cyber campaigning that threatened the public sector and the private sector. Fortunately, we have partnered with a lot of partner agencies, and here I want to stress the importance of cooperation between governments and the importance of the cooperation between sectors and between governments, private sector, and practitioners. In the aftermath of the attack, we swiftly implemented robust measures to strengthen our cyber protection capabilities and collaborating with friendly countries who generously assisted in navigating the intricate and unfamiliar landscape of cybercrime. As government, we took decisive action by increasing the budget for technology investment by 7-fold. We have consistently sought support and cooperation from countries experienced in the field of cybersecurity and have established cooperative relationships with internet service providers. As a government, it's understood that we must improve our efforts to identify, deter, protect against, detect, and respond to these actions and to these actors. And our security structures are also carefully examining what has occurred in the past. But protecting the nation from malicious cyber actors is also a national security point and matter. And this is why I repeat for the third time the importance of the public and private sector together, who must adapt to ensure its products are built and operate securely and to foster a more secure cyberspace. In the end, the trust we place in our digital infrastructure should be proportional to how trustworthy and transparent the infrastructure is and to the consequences we will incur if the trust is misplaced. Of course, there are a lot of countries that strive to provide a comprehensive range of online services, and it's just a few years ago that many governments took the shift in the digital agenda. However, in this new reality, information security and protection against cyber attacks are of paramount importance. These attacks serve as a wake-up call that our national cybersecurity must be safeguarded from threats and damages, utilizing state-of-the-art methods and technology. And our goal is to ensure the uninterrupted functionality of online information platforms, even in the face of potential and future cybernetic attacks. There is an improvement, of course, that needs to be done also on the part of disinformation, as you say, because with the artificial intelligence, the problems of the deep fakes and the problems of steering, let's say, different declarations throughout the populations remain a risk. And this is why we need the need for prevention, for detection, for assessment and remediation of cyber incidents that are a top priority and should be a top priority, but not only for government administration, but also for the cooperation of governments among each other. Now we are prioritizing and elevating cybersecurity like never before, and clearly understand that in the era we live, it necessitates the construction of a comprehensive cybersecurity architecture and dynamic, which is of an adaptive design. And to create a secure ecosystem, it is imperative that we make sustainable global investment in modern infrastructure capable of countering and containing any form of cyber attacks. We understand that this is a lengthy and costly and very dynamic process, where results may take time to manifest. However, we acknowledge that in this endeavor, we cannot act alone, because it's vital to coordinate our efforts with the international partners to construct the safest and the most stable ecosystem possible, protecting our digital systems from cyber attacks. And here I want to also avail the opportunity to repeat the importance of legislation in place, which should be not only a country and national legislation, but also an overarching European legislation that can allow countries to cooperate with each other, but also can allow agencies, the law enforcement agencies, to cooperate and to investigate jointly these new threats that we're facing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that we found out something we already guessed, that it's happening. And all these attacks are a reality, and we are all very vulnerable. And also that we need to cooperate, perhaps not only regionally, but also at European level, but also at global level. And now I will turn to our second speaker, James Morris, Political Counselor of the US Embassy in Greece, to ask him to tell us how he sees for this more global perspective. We have the lessons learned from the US policy, but also we know that we need to cooperate between US, Europe, and this region.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's great to be here with our NATO allies, the Greeks, but also the Deputy Minister from Albania. And we were very alarmed by the cyber attack by a state actor on Albania last year. And part of my remarks today are about how it is our alliances and our partnerships that are really key to our response to this challenge. So I arrived here actually in August of last year, and before I came to Greece, I was working on our Russia desk in the State Department, and we spent a lot of time on these issues. And one of the issues we spent time on was a Russian citizen by the name of Alexander Vinnik. And I won't go too far into this story, but basically Vinnik was a cyber criminal. He was a thief on a very large scale. He used cybercrime to make money, and he was sort of moved from the Greek judicial system to the French judicial system, back to the Greek system, and then was eventually extradited to the US. And I highlight this as a success story because really this was the result of a framework of existing extradition agreements, mutual legal assistance treaties, and the ability of our governments to talk to each other to get a criminal to justice, and one using very sophisticated techniques in the cyber world. But it took a lot of time. It cost a lot of money. And at every point, there was a real risk that Vinnik would be released for 24 hours, and he would use those 24 hours to get on a plane and return to Russia and never be seen again. And so that is another challenge as we talk about these issues, is that we have our allies and our partners who we can work with, who we have agreements with, and who we share our values with, and then there's all other parts of the world that are much more challenging. And then there are countries in the category of Iran or Russia that are threatening us on different levels. We have states using cyber weapons to attack other states in the case of Albania, or Iran in the case of Albania, or Russia in the case of the US with 2016 elections interference, or the solar winds attack, or other examples such as that. So it's a very complicated challenge, and one that really it takes a whole of government effort, even in the US, to respond. So there is a administration policy on cybersecurity. I won't talk about it too long, but there's a few sort of what's new about this policy. One is that there's a recognition that you cannot rely on the user as the ultimate sort of stop point for cybersecurity, right? And we all use the internet and other technology, and we know the frustration of this. So there's a recognition that the government, the federal government in the US, and the companies need to accept more of the risk and the responsibility to solve this problem, and that for too long the responsibility has been put on the user. And so right now the administration is engaged in a dialogue, both with the agencies within the government, but also with companies on how to do this. And then there's also, I think, the second part about what's new is a focus on more long-term strategies and solutions, that we've been doing too much crisis management. It's state attacks on our election system, it's ransomware, and that we're always in reaction mode. But working with companies to develop more long-term strategies on this challenge. There's basically 5 pillars of the strategy. I'll just go through them really quickly. One is defending critical infrastructure. Albania is a great case. There have been a lot of attacks on critical infrastructure in the US as well, whether it's ransomware attacks or state attacks like I mentioned on our election system. But again, like I said, there's an issue that the victim oftentimes is not well equipped to respond, right? If it's a hospital or a pipeline or some other piece of our infrastructure that's being attacked, they may not have really the tools they need to respond. So the other is to disrupt and dismantle the actors. I talked about this a little bit already with the example of Vinnick. It's hard, right? If you're talking about cyber criminals in the US or cyber criminals in Europe, then you can go after them, disrupt them, arrest them, etc. But if they're operating out of other parts of the world, it's much harder. 2 is working with market forces to drive security and resilience. This is a little bit what I talked about, a dialogue with companies on how to make their products better and more secure. 4th is investing in a more resilient future. And then the 5th is really what I talked about, as well as working with our partners, and that's primarily NATO in the EU. So the cooperation with NATO is moving very quickly. You basically have different elements of this. 1 is the cybersecurity of NATO itself. 2 is the cybersecurity of the individual defense and security systems of the allies. And then 3 is the private sectors in each of the countries. And so, and at each of those levels, there's essentially a NATO strategy, and you can see that online. On the other side of this, there's the EU, which I think the Deputy Minister touched on, and there is a US-EU dialogue on cybersecurity. Again, we see the EU as this is the regulatory entity, and we have a lot of examples already on data privacy, telecommunications, and so on, about how it's absolutely essential that the US and the EU be linked up, because if we go in different directions, then we're going to be a lot weaker. And we've touched a little bit on AI, but I think that's really going to be the main challenge on AI. So I think one of the questions up there is something like, what should we do about AI? And I think if you're a government official, the only thing you can say is, I don't know, because this is so new and changing so quickly that it's really something that I think we're going to be wrestling with in the immediate future. But right now, the US policy is that it should, 1, safeguard individual rights, but 2, also foster innovation. And so that's very vague, and I think it's going to be worked out. I know that there's a dialogue within the OECD to sort of, amongst the OECD members, to talk about norms and sort of coming to a common understanding on AI. So we're very supportive of that. The last thing I wanted to touch on was just Ukraine, because I wanted to end on what I see as a positive story. In my prior career, prior tours, I served in Georgia, and in the 2008 Georgia war, Russia was very effective in using cyber attacks to really cripple Georgian infrastructure ahead of its military aggression in Georgia. In the recent war in Ukraine, we've really seen the opposite, which is that Ukraine has responded pretty well on the cyber front in terms of keeping its electrical grid going, keeping its government running. It is under an enormous amount of pressure, but it is an example of all of this resilience we've built through NATO, through the EU. It has worked to some extent in the case of Ukraine, and Albania is another great example of where NATO and EU are now plugging in and helping fix the problems in Albania. So with that, I'll stop, and back to the moderator.
Thank you very much. You tackled a lot of interesting points. I think that we see that one of the questions is who is responsible, and also how we can stop, how we can punish the cyber criminals. And I know that in the Council of Europe there has been a lot of work done on this, and I would like to ask Milica Vesocic, who is dealing with these issues as program manager at the Council of Europe, to tell us a little bit how you see it from your own perspective.
Thank you very much. I think that my presentation will be very much in line with previous speakers, in particular Deputy Minister Kuko, who was giving a real case example what is happening in the level of member state, who is basically dealing with the cyber criminals and giving cyber response. Just to give a little remark on COVID pandemics, which happened in 2019, there are some forecast that is coming and is saying that next pandemic that can happen would be the cyber pandemic, for which we need to find proper vaccination, so to say, proper resilience by each member state. In the Council of Europe, I think it is well known, there is a Budapest Convention already existing for 30 years, surviving the test of time, dealing with crimes that are committed by use of computer or internet. This convention has multilateral and beyond of 46 member states of the Council of Europe diapason. Basically is a worldwide convention, and as such had a very indispensable ingredient. It is second protocol on cybercrime convention, where basically member states are given an enabling space to cooperate among each others and to provide access to evidence in the cloud, because cyber criminals can only be punished or examined if the evidence is found. And in order to access such evidence, you need to deal with private providers, with private companies, to enable police, to enable public prosecutors to reach out this content. And if these contents are locked, and they're often in multiple location or belonging to multiple jurisdiction, such a thing would be almost impossible. So I would here just name several challenges that are faced with the cybercrime, so to say, cooperation field, and cybercrime key challenges. They are how to strengthen legislation on cybercrime and electronic evidence. It is country specific, but it needs to be aligned with Budapest Convention. Then are the judges and prosecutors and law enforcement capable of effectively addressing cybercrime and handling electronic evidence? Are the specific cybercrime and forensic units sufficiently equipped and having enough knowledge to basically go in the cloud and found what is necessary? Then we have challenged how to improve further interagency cooperation and to enhance investigative capacities. Then, as I said, this promotion of public-private cooperation is the key and can only fortify the tackling cyber threat, in tackling and prosecuting the cyber threats. Then we have as well to care about if we are using sufficiently enough mutual legal assistance, because the Convention on Mutual Legal Assistance exists, but it is on a very cumbersome legal framework. So these mechanisms, you know, there are 24 hours, for example, focal points to which prosecution service, police can address, but often they are not so responsive. So I think, because here we are talking about regional issues, we need to see how to mobilize these points and these layers of state authorities and put them to work together at the regional level. I think this is the one of very important elements. I will also illustrate here that maybe is known, maybe not, that less than 1%, it is called the cybercrime net proceeds, meaning that what do we actually succeed to enforce cases, cybercrime cases. In reality, they are less than 1%. It means almost that there is no cyber justice, so to say. So I think that very big challenges are ahead of us, and I'm very pleased to hear that entire panel on foreign investment and innovative cooperation was very optimistic and very vibrant. I think that this is definitely an avenue to go, but it needs to be backed up with sufficient legislative and operational framework at the level of state authorities, which will also back up this kind of investment and make cyberspace enough secure that this investment, which is to be promoted, and also innovation gets its full capacity. So I think this is from my side, and of course, if there is a question later on, we can discuss.
Thank you very much. We see that there is a lot needed to be done, and also to broaden the space of the cooperation. And I know that in the Council of Europe, you're dealing not only from what's happened with the cyber criminals, but also in the case that some authoritarian regime, somebody who are just, you know, an opponent can be considered, for instance, a cyber criminal. And this is the other, let's say, side of the coin. And on this, I would like to ask Vuk Maras, who is the director of BRN Montenegro, to tell us some things from this point of view of democracy, citizens, and risks that they have in exercising their freedom of speech.
Thank you so much. Hello everyone from my side, and hello on behalf of the entire BERN, which is covering basically all the countries that are participating here. I would like actually to switch a coin a little bit here, talking about AI and are we ready, especially in relation to the disinformation, because what we have heard so far was dominantly focusing on cybersecurity, but I would like to emphasize it from rather media freedoms angle and what's happening in that respect. As you all know, BERN is, besides local offices that we have all around, having a flagship portal, Balkan Insight, which is publishing in English and which has for years now implemented a number of investigations regarding disinformation in different countries and in different segments. And so far we have covered, I believe, over 15 countries in that endeavor. However, still when we say disinformation, primarily most of people react towards, okay, it's Russia, it's Trump's campaign, it's basically all those things that are mostly popular in the social media, but I would like to see what's happening in our own backyard. Because let's be honest, at least I will be speaking for Montenegro, because I don't wanna raise reactions of that type and to have that kind of a discussion, but governments are the biggest aggregators of disinformation. Because, for example, in my country, we are on a daily basis, let's say, fed with fake news, with semi-fake news, with things that are basically a manipulation. So it's not something that we reinvented with Trump's campaign and Russia's interference. It's something we already had. The thing is, we are now changing channels of communication, how those informations are being fed to us, and more importantly, and that's where I want to come, to the children, because we are the least problem in this story. When I say we, I mean mid-aged and older age people, for example, sitting in this room. Let me just give you an example. ChatGPT launched in November 2022. So we are talking about roughly 7 months ago. Since that period, it has been followed with another several AI services for photography, for video production, for body copy, you name it. So basically you can find now on the internet everything you want. And just a few days ago it was announced that another EA bot was created which will allow you to generate video content from basically general footage you create, which is something that, for example, digital content creators needed 5, 6, 7 hours to basically manipulate a basic video for publishing. Now it will be 5 to 6 minutes, and it's doing all the job, so you don't need to have any kind of a technical knowledge in advance. What's happening in the meanwhile? So the technique is progressing to that level, and what we are having, for example, in Europe, we are dealing still, and colleagues from Council of Europe know it, with set of legislation where we are talking about trying basically to set some grounds and regulation for the digital space and social media. What's happening in the Western Balkans, it's 3 times worse than in Europe, of course, because we don't have any regulatory framework which is able to deal with the problems we are facing with. We don't officially, when I say we, the governments officially don't know about these problems we are facing with. On the other hand, US is basically the only example of a country that is developed enough who is able to fight back on disinformation and on new technologies which are the most problematic. NATO as well as a group does not offer us, who are members of that organization, enough knowledge and capacities to fight back disinformation. And basically the other side, when I say the other side, I mean those who are using this information as a tool, they are basically utilizing this resource to the maximum. For example, I'll give you just 2. You all remember 2 days ago, or 3 days ago, I can't recall correctly, there was a fake photography published on social media stating that there was an explosion in Pentagon. So it was basically run on Twitter, on a general feed. No official source at that moment confirmed this information. Several smaller media outlets followed and basically wanted to be the first to report. And what happened as a result? Basically, S&P 500 index fell for 30 points. Translated in something we all know, potential huge loss, which is measured in billions of US dollars. Luckily, this was discovered, so to say, by mainstream media with credibility on time, so it was balanced. But this is just showing us how AA can actually help us make chaos, and that we don't have any kind of a response towards it. A bit more banal example is, you all remember the now famous photo of the Pope Francis in Balenciaga jacket, which was famous all over the place. I believe if you now check this with kids and with youngers, they have no clue that this photograph is fake. So we are living in a society where people are accepting headlines and photographs and video content. That's it. Nobody is reading what's behind the story. And I would basically just like to ask you now, how many of you have TikTok accounts? Can I see some hands?
TikTok. How
Yeah.
many have TikTok?
Okay. Snapchat? Nobody. How many of you did use communication tools within video games? Okay. Well, you are aware that for all your children, neighbors, relatives, these are the primary sources of information. And I'm talking about people up to 23, 24 years old. So we have a bunch of population which we are unable to catch because we have no clue how these things works. And this is the main problem. This is why, for example, we in Bern are trying to keep up. We have opened a TikTok account. Okay, it's still far from what we would like to have it, but at least we are trying to offer some kind of informative content in order to contribute to the reduction of the disinformation that is heavily published through this platform. On the other hand, you know what was the idea of Montenegrin government to fight it? To shut down TikTok. That was our former Prime Minister Krivo Kapic's idea, which was luckily, of course, killed in the cabinet because there were younger people understanding what this might bring in terms of censorship and everything. But this is the clear example that the state does not have, unfortunately, at least my state, any kind of a response to the new age threats that are occurring all the time. And let me conclude with what do we need. And I would say, first of all, we would need our governments to stop being generators of fake news and to show some responsibility and transparency, to offer us credible data which we can actually utilize. We need strong support to credible media, because if we learned anything from the US example of the fake photo from Pentagon, is that mainstream media are the only ones at this moment who are able to actually calm down the situation and who are able to debunk disinformation that has been at that time maybe placed by an individual who has a bit more skills in IT. Tomorrow it can be Russia. Now you don't need an FSB to create an affair. This is the thing. You need one student with fairly good IT skills. And that one individual can put all of us in the panel on a yacht with a Russian oligarch surrounded with prostitutes. And it can go viral, be seen by 15 million people, until we are able to say this is fake. And we cannot prove it, because it became so good at this point. And we don't have any capacities to do that kind of a forensic. We need government to be open and truthful, because this is the way we have to partner. When I say we, I mean the media community and the official institutions in countries, because this is the only way we can show to citizens that we are serious. And of course, we need media literacy of citizens. We need to understand how they communicate, and then we have to teach them how to be able to recognize and then discard, of course, disinformation. I'm stopping here because I wasted too much time, but I'm open to any questions.
No, you raised a lot of questions, that's true. And of course, disinformation, but I think that we live in an era where we have problem with information also, not only disinformation, because disinformation, if it is done in purpose, let's say by a hostile entity or group, or in politics, but the problem is that even if there is no intention of disinformation, there is a big problem of what is a reliable information and how people can understand if it is a reliable information or not. So in this, certainly, and I know that this is also discussed very much in the Council of Europe, is the question of education and media literacy. That is very important. On the other hand, if it is intentional, we saw how much important are the bots when they try to intervene in political campaigns. And you also mentioned the chat bot, which is now the hottest subject everywhere. So I would like to ask to an expert from the technical point of view, Professor Yannis Papastathiou, who is at the Department of Electrical Computer Engineering of the Aristotle University in Thessaloniki, to tell us his view. How do you see it from an expert's point of view?
Thank you, and thank you for being here. Well, let me start from what has just been said, that someone with very basic IT skills can create this photo that you mentioned. Well, the actual case is even worse. You don't even have to have any skills now. I mean, if you, unfortunately, I don't have my laptop in front of me, but I'm quite sure that I can create a photo just like the one that you mentioned in less than a minute by using one of those AI bots that you mentioned for video editing and photo editing. So, yeah, in that respect, we have to face it. It will be here, it is here, and it will stay here, and it will be even worse. On the other hand, this is a threat that we cannot, I believe, at least, face when we are within our country or even within our region. It's something more global. You have heard from James that the US does collaborate with the EU so as to end up with a better EU secure policies and stuff like that. So it's something which is really, really difficult to handle. Now, if you are asking me about what can be done in terms of the region, so Balkans mainly, the thing is that we are all quite small. So if we want to create something bigger, what we have to do is that we have to collaborate. This is something that we can easily say in theory. In practice, there are quite a few problems. For example, if we want to collaborate in terms of cybersecurity, we have to exchange sensitive data. And we know that there are states here that used to be enemies until, whatever, a decade ago. So it's not that easy to ask those states to share their intelligence. On the other hand, there are ways to share the intelligence without sharing the data, which is something that the AI especially allows us to do. So the thing is that we can collaborate if we want for disinformation, for example, by working together without actually exchanging sensitive data, which is something good. It has not been done. I'm not sure whether it will be done in the near future, but this is one way that we can move forward. Now, there are some other things that I have just briefly written down here. So another thing that has been mentioned quite a lot is that we are talking about criminals that do operate from other countries and attack different countries and so on. So what's going on? One of the things is that in my university, quite a while ago, that was 3-4 years ago, they created a system that allows the EU, or most of the EU actually, states to exchange legal data with what we call a legal signature. So every state is obliged to accept them as an evidence, which is something which was not the case until quite a few years ago, because it was something you can have an evidence for the Greek legal system which cannot be sent in a secure way and being an evidence for the German one. So this does not include the region here. So one way probably to move forward is to try to see how the legal ministries can work together and find out the best way to exchange legal documents. This can certainly help someone who is attacking from Greece an Albanian infrastructure or something like that. Now, some other things that I believe should be said in such a panel is that, first of all, there is this golden rule in security, which is the weakest link. So the attacker always attacks the weakest link. Now, let me use as an example the electric grid. We have electric grid in the region that are more or less all interconnected. We know that Bulgaria, North Macedonia, Greece, and Albania do have their electric grid interconnected, so you can get electricity from another country when you need it, and so on. Now, all those electric grids have their own security systems. If I am an attacker, I will select what will be the weakest one, and I will attack that. And then after that, I can certainly create problems to all of them. So unless we work all together and try to find, common ways of identifying the attacks first, and obviously after that respond the attacks, we will most probably end up to quite some problems. The last thing about AI, we mentioned AI, we mentioned ChatGPT, we mentioned all those things. One of the basic feature of AI is that it can predict quite successfully things if it is fed with a lot of data. And when we say a lot of data, we are talking about millions, billions of whatever you would like to predict, and then if you give those million predictions to it, then it can create its own predictions. So one of the things that will be really good, I suppose, would be that if we sit all together and try to share our data. And when I say share our data, we can share our, for example, our infrastructure data, like the electricity consumption. If we share them together, then we can create a global policy, a global prediction of what will happen tomorrow throughout the interconnected electricity grids. So we will end up with a much better maintenance of the system. The other thing has to do with, I have written down the tax, for tax purposes. We know that there are a lot of companies that are trying to get to the state that has the smaller taxes, the lower taxes, and operate from there in a kind of semi-legal case in several cases. This can be identified if we share our data. And it doesn't need to be AI, it can also be some kind of more conventional ways to do that. So those are the things that I believe can help in working, in creating something which will be more secure, more efficient, and we are a region of whatever, I think we are in total something like 45 million or so. So we can act as a big state. Well, Rebecca may say that this is not a big state, but anyway, so we can act as a big state if in those aspects, if we decide to work together.
Thank you very much. You touched on an issue that is very important as a problem, which is that if we are not at the same level of security, there is a vulnerability of data, and this is a big blockage. And on the other hand, there is also connectivity is very positive, but also if there is not the same possibility of securing interconnected networks, then there is still a vulnerability. So I think this is extremely important. So we heard all the challenges from the speakers, but what is the strategy? You want to say something there, please?
I wanted to say something which I missed a little bit, but it is going very nicely aligned with what Professor said previously. It is about that basically we need to work very much together, and that this second protocol of cybercrime convention that entered into force in May 2022 gives very three different lines of cooperation. One is that there is a direct request to registrars or service providers to investigate in jurisdictions of other member states. So member states can cooperate, and here in the region would be very welcomed such a cooperation. Second is that they implement government-to-government cooperation for accessing subscriber information or traffic data, which is the key to spot the cyber criminal. And third one is to establish joint investigations. So prosecution service can establish joint investigations to find cyber criminal. So I think this is very much one of the structure that is around of cybersecurity, how the cyber legislation and cyber cooperation is built in the region.
So I would like to give the floor to Roberta Randerat from the Agora Strategy Group to tell us what is the strategy, how we should prioritize and find some way.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I will gladly say a few words about geopolitics as a geopolitical consultant and strategies, or let's say, talk about the big picture at the bigger scale, and then talk about Germany and cybersecurity, as I was asked to. I want to start with three observations. The first one is we're witnessing right now, we're experiencing geopolitical developments with drastic changes, disruptive change, and they are real crises that will come in an increasing frequency from now on. So we will undergo through these crises more and more. This is the first observation, which is crucial in order to understand the role of cybersecurity within that. Then second, the Russian attack on Ukraine is not a singular moment. There will be no going back to the pre-crisis level. It is a catalyst for deeper conflicts, be it the Chinese pressure towards Taiwan, be it the tensions between Israel and Palestine, be it the relationship with Iran, and all this comes with an increase of politically motivated cyber attacks. And then the third observation, and I know this is not new to you, but of course, you know, at the moment we are witnessing geostrategic rivalries between state blocs. And these rivalries, which are value-driven, system-driven, not geographic, and therefore more fluid, they reflect themselves in the decoupling for technology standards, and they reflect themselves in the struggle for resources, such as critical raw materials, labor, know-how, water, food, and so on. Why am I mentioning all this? This means that this interest-driven foreign policy does not only come with traditional robust means and weapons, as we've seen in the past, but we are now witnessing the dissolution of war and peace. We have entered the stage of hybrid warfare, and this means that cyber attacks and disinformation and attacks on critical cyber infrastructure will be new companions. So within the landscape of new crises and new threat scenarios, such as the energy crisis, the climate change, and so on, cyber is a very central one. And all these developments are connected to the realm of cyber in every way and on every layer. So, for example, as I said, the geostrategic rivalry will reflect itself in a struggle for resources. Critical raw materials are crucial for a digitalized world. You know that one needs up to 50 different kinds of metals for a smartphone. So it is vital that we secure access to critical raw materials, and this is the very geopolitical part of it, if you want so. And then also there's a big economic dimension to it. The expected costs for cyber attacks are to be around 10.5 trillion annually by 2025. What does that mean if you compare it? This means that if cybercrime was a country, it would be the third largest economy in the world after the US and China, and before Japan and Germany, for example. So this is why I'm talking about the geopolitical big landscape here, and in order to you know, to depict where cyber is in all that. And the list, I mean, goes on and on of examples, but I was asked to speak about where is Germany in this scenario. And this is easily put, I already said so yesterday at dinner. To put it in a nutshell, we're good at building cars, we're unfortunately not good at cybersecurity. But this means it doesn't mean we're not being attacked, and the German Ministry of Interior has disclosed that the vast majority of cyber attacks detected in Germany with suspected state control are attributed, and this is not a surprise, to Russia, China, and Iran. And so we are here in the same boat with you. So where are we? I said Germany's running behind. We did understand now that we have to do something. There is the Federal Office for Information Security, and they publish a report every year. I've read it, so you don't have to, because it's 200 pages in German. And the bottom line of it is that there are each year more and more cyber attacks, and the main form of attacks on businesses and public administration is ransomware. But this is so abstract. What does it mean in actual numbers? In actual numbers, it means that in Germany, in the year 2022, last year, out of 365 days, 207 days, certain public services could not be delivered, public services such as welfare, car licenses, and so on, because of cyber attacks. So if you hear that number, you really see that Germany needs a cyber sprint right now, and we're probably even further behind than many other countries in the European Union. So this is very pressing at the moment, and therefore Germany has tripled its budget for digital infrastructure now, from 400 million last year to 1.2 billion this year, and has brought several programs on the way, such as our digital strategy that contains 18 key projects and has been developed together by all German ministries and the Chancellery, and it has been coordinated by the Federal Ministry of Transport and Digital. The second one, the second big strategy is the National Security Strategy that should have been discussed today in the Parliament, but was postponed to July 14th. And also, of course, now we do have some more institutions, but also here we're lagging behind, you know. So we have the Federal Office of Information Security that I have mentioned, who publish a report annually. But then if you look at the Federal Ministry for Digital and Transport, who were in the lead for our digital strategy, this ministry had just been formed in 2021 when the new government came into office. Before that, for 16 years under Angela Merkel, we didn't even have a ministry dealing with digital affairs. And I've seen in many, you know, on our name sheets today, many forms of, be it the Greek Ministry for Digital Governance, many forms of it. But if you look at the German one, it says Federal Ministry for Digital and Transport, which is only 2 years old. And then if you look at the organizational chart, you see that transport is still the main or the vocal point. Digitalization and digital affairs remains not the highest priority, which it should. Then there are also some other points that are to be tackled in Germany. For example, the police should be given more power to prevent cybercrime. It remains unclear until today how exactly this should look like. There was even a discussion about a constitutional change in order to do so. This will be part of the bigger national security strategy. And of course, Germany does participate in EU programs such as the EU Cyber Solidarity Act or the Digital Europe program. But we do need, apart from building our national strategies, of course, we do need to build international cooperations. And just like other European countries and the US, Germany is expanding its international cooperation with like-minded partners. That has become apparent last weekend at the G7 summit, and also before that at the G7 Digital and Tech Ministers meeting. So I think we're now finally on a good way, even though it's late. The biggest challenge that will remain in all of this, and this is not a German challenge, this is a challenge everywhere, is to prioritize the investments. Should you invest in climate, in defense, or in digital? I mean, of course, they're all linked and they interfere with each other, but after Corona, all our households have suffered, and of course, there have to be prioritizations, which remains the main challenge, probably. And then maybe just to say one last thing about AI, because this was also part of the topic for today. If you look at, I'm a historian by training, and if I look at the last 50 to 70 years, I feel like not only in Germany but in Europe, whenever there's a new innovation or a new technique, our first question is, how do we regulate it? Whereas in the United States, and also nowadays in China, the first question is, how do we use it? So maybe this is also a question of mindset. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You gave us a lot of ideas on strategy and priorities, because, as you rightly said, cyber threats are not only a question of hard security, something that NATO is dealing with from some years now, but it's also linked, for instance, with economic antagonisms that are here to stay. So we will have it ahead of us. And also, it's very important when you said how much costly it is. And if we see it from this point of view, that needs that it's worthwhile to invest. If we don't invest, and this is at national but also at European and global level in this, to fight this, then we cannot, let's say, keep the pace, because technological advances are so quick, and also because these antagonisms also at global level are here to stay for at least a long number of years. So I would think now we can open the floor for, let's say, comments, questions to the speakers. Anyone? Yeah.
Yes. No, okay. Thank you all for a very excellent panel, one of the most interesting of the day, I might say, and I was a speaker at one, so that says a lot. I have 3 or 4 comments, questions, but if you bear with me just to frame them in a way, because all of you spoke about different aspects, whether it's cyber attacks from countries, from states, actors, whether it's AI, whether it's cyber crime, and so forth. Cybersecurity is still a concept of security, right? So it bears down to the competing and sometimes conflicting concepts that Greek people might have about what is security for them versus people from Albania versus Germany. What do we prioritize as a threat? The margin of freedom we're willing to give to protect that threat. So in a concept of you all advocated for cooperation, right? So in a concept, my first question is in a concept of an alliance, for example, like NATO is. To what extent are we talking about prioritizing cybersecurity and cyber protection from the member states? Could we see in the future when it will be more important to protect critical infrastructure from cyber attacks, that a member state can trigger Article 5 if it has a significant cyber attack that had crippled critical infrastructure and endangers security in a more substantial, pragmatic way, not just cyber? And then you talked about sensitive data. I was wondering, how do we define sensitive data? Who defines what sensitive data is when we are the data ourselves? When I can download an app on my phone and I cannot negotiate the terms and conditions. I cannot negotiate the extent to which the app will filter my data and control them. And bear in mind that by 2025 there will be almost 20 billion mobile devices in the world. So what is sensitive data at the end? And then moving a bit to AI and the use of chat GTP and all those concepts. On the one hand, identified maybe a lack of cyber education that will eventually and progressively allow people to use better those tools, because at the end of the day we talk about tools. But then at the current moment, you said, Mr. Morris, you said that AI right now is something new, right? But then I don't have an extensive knowledge of that. But let's say I go to an AI software like Chat GTP, and I type, write me a software to execute cyber attacks. Will it be able to deliver me a software that will be able to carry out cyber attacks? And then can any person that has not actual knowledge of software programming, but by using those tools, become a cyber criminal, let's say? Not for massive attacks, but for simple crimes like stealing or frauding or creating ransom and so forth. Yes.
Oh, you open now another 10 questions that are very interesting. So who would like to respond from that? Yes.
I will try to address very, very briefly without giving an answer, because we don't have answers about that. But I think that we should all agree that we face a major ethical dilemma with the new technologies and with everything that is happening now in our societies. Because unfortunately, the development is quite faster comparing to what our societies are doing. And we know that when it comes to the criminal, element of it, the principle doesn't change, because in the criminal world, in the very conventional criminal world nowadays, when traffic happens, when traffics are happening in the transnational, let's say, element of it, the criminals call each other, exchange the values with a swiftness like that, while governments should sign protocols, they should allocate budgets, they should send letters, to each other that arrive after 2 weeks. So you can see the difference between the pace of the movement of the threat and the pace of the movement of, let's say, the structures. So when you talk about an alliance, it's I think that NATO is the best placed alliance that we actually have. And in what sense? The Western Balkans is a region which is fragmented into countries which are rather small. I mean, Albania is effectively around 3 million. Montenegro is almost 1 million, 600 and something. So can you imagine for all of us to build a protective infrastructure, how costly would it be and how impossible would it be to do that? So the whole Western Balkans is 17 million inhabitants. And it would make very much sense to actually gather forces along with the alliance, of course. And this is why we do have, let's say, the defensive alliance and NATO, which is the best placed, to join forces. And in this, I think that the ethical dilemma that we face is whether we should take some difficult decisions in which our citizens will not understand us. So I think that we should give an answer to that question, and I think we should talk to people a lot about this kind of matter, because it's really important that the society as a whole understands that. And it's not just a matter of literacy into taking, let's say, teachers into school or giving digital literacy to parents. It's not only that, it's giving the idea to the society that now we are already in the future and these are the risks that we're facing. So this is pretty much in a nutshell what do I think about it. And I think that on the other hand, when it comes to the NATO alliance, the principles remain the same. Meaning that when we have the common skies policy and when we have, let's say, the shared defense among each other, we should definitely have something on the cyber element. I know that there is a tremendous work being done on centers of excellence on the cyber aspect. There were also discussions with our fellow American allies to see whether we can have a center of excellence in the Balkans. I don't know where, but that could be quite a very good idea. And I think this is the way how it should go. Thank you.
Now, when you said that, I cannot refrain myself by saying a comment, because you mentioned the size of the Balkan countries. And when you think about it, you can say how the EU is so slow of accepting the Balkans as member states, and this is important also for security, among other.
Forum about that.
Yeah. No, but I mean, it's also very much linked to the security of Europe, of the region, and from NATO allies' point of view. So, anybody else?
I would like it, sure.
Yeah.
If I may, because this is building actually quite good what you mentioned about basically Western Balkan countries. Let me just give you one example of the cybersecurity as we see it in Montenegro. It's currently a joke, if you ask vast majority of people, but because of that joke, so to say, you don't have accessible probably 80% still, 80% of digital services to citizens. We had hacking attacks last year. First official story, because they were running who will accuse Russia first, although they had no clue what happened. We had former intelligence director saying it was Russians. Then, a few days later, they rejected the first theory and said it's Cuba ransomware. Okay, it's Cuba ransomware. We don't have any kind of data available on the damage. Then they rejected also the Cuba ransomware, because in the meanwhile FBI came together with French agency to help them actually establish the idea who did it. Nothing. And you know what's the last, I wouldn't say official point, but something that vast majority of politicians who are in power speculate. That it's basically some civil servants who were watching porn. and you don't have 80% of services yet, like for a year. So this is why I don't think that we actually, when I say we, at least in Montenegro, I don't know what situation in other countries, we understand the concept of cybersecurity at all. We do have it in terms, NATO says, you have to do this, this, and this, then we bring a strategy, then we employ people, we buy computers, we ask them, do you know to fight cyber attacks? They answer, yes, we know, and that's it. When it comes to practice, we don't know nothing. And just another thing about you, basically, shall we learn to use AI tools better? I agree. But we are not talking here about making, falsifying doctor thesis. Because for that we have time to discover that it was used by everything. I'm talking here about the example of the US stock, which plummeted in few minutes. And this, I'm afraid that these kind of damages cannot be repaired fastly enough. And this is why we need some kind of a better response team. Because, for example, I now searched YouTube and probably will have Greek intelligence on my head in the hotel, how to make a bomb. You have several tutorials on YouTube how to make a bomb. Would you like sodium, pipe bomb, smoke bomb, petrol bomb? And I'm watching just the first results. Cardboard sound, whatever it is, and even a paper bomb. But people are not drawing it because they will go to jail. This is where I'm afraid we are facing with the problem of, can you write me a code that I do a cyber attack? That they are well aware that potentially they may not get caught. And this is where the risk is, with our lack of knowledge how to fight back in cybercrime. Because although, for example, the sodium bomb has 23,000 views, probably nobody threw it. They were just watching the video. Here they can do it more easy because they believe they will not end up in jail.
Any other comment or question? We don't have much time, as we're supposed to finish at 7:30, but anyone else? Otherwise, we start with some concluding remarks from Professor Papagstathio.
Thank you. Just a kind of an answer to what you mentioned about the sensitive data first. When we're talking about sensitive data for cybersecurity, unfortunately, we're talking about what the states mean with sensitive. So we're talking about infrastructure, numbers, infrastructure, locations, stuff like that, that if you are, an ex-enemy, it's not that easy to share, because you know that if someone else knows where all those things are and how they work and so on, they can attack you either physically or cyberly. So, and also about this thing that you mentioned about the NATO and whether there should be a NATO force that you can ask when you have a cyber attack. The answer is yes, it could be much easier, than sending planes and ships and so on. However, we have to make sure that the things there are some preliminary tasks that should be performed. So we have to make sure that all the things are compatible and we can share the data, we can talk the same language and stuff like that. And the last thing about AI, and which is kind of a more general, and whether AI can perform cyber attacks and so on. My feeling is, and this is basically my personal feeling, is that there would not be that much of a problem for the cyber attacks that you can make using the chatbots and stuff like that. Those are things that you can most probably identify quite easily. Because the thing is that I will have access to the same ChatGPT, or more or less the same AI software that you will have. So I can kind of predict what you can do, or I can predict the level of your attack quite easily, which is kind of different from the bombs that we mentioned. Because, if you make a bomb, it will be a bomb, it can kill people. If you have an attack that can be identified, and there are kind of countermeasures for it, then it's nonsense. So I'm not that concerned about this part.
Thank you. I think one of the things I took out of the discussion was the importance of allies and partnerships. And I'm not an expert in the West Balkans, but I think, we do see other examples in the Baltics or Israel is a great example of a small country that, you know, through decades built through an education system, you know, a pretty good high-tech sector, and some of those countries are leaders on cybersecurity. So I think NATO is a great tool. NATO's advantage is standardization. You know, how do you turn the Polish army from being a Soviet army into a U.S. model army? It just takes decades, but it's through standardization, and that's what I think will happen on cybersecurity as well. But anyways, it's been a real pleasure, and thank you.
Mr. Puko.
Just wanted to add something which kind of differentiate a little bit this two domain of discussion. I know that this forum is a lot on cybersecurity, but there are cyber attacks which belong purely to cyber justice, which are all the domain of being public goods and you know, having the danger for state security. There are sometimes cyber attacks which are of pure commercial nature, or you know, that have other effects. So they are subject of criminal justice, and still with, I think, for good investments for climate which will bring innovation, we need to deal with cybercrime in terms of its pure phenomenon as a part of criminal justice.
Okay. So pretty much I don't have anything to add more than what we discussed. Still, you mentioned, my colleagues from the Council of Europe mentioned the element of the criminal justice, and I think that in the foreseeable future we have to see how do we tackle this kind of new crime, and I loved actually the term of cyber justice. So I think that this is something that needs to be leveraged and discussed even more in the future, because it's a very crucial element when it comes to the whole developing of this new avenue of humanity that is the cyberspace. And to know that without having the basis of the justice in the first place in every system, then that system cannot thrive, because there are no rules, there is no possibility to, let's say, to have a healthy way of developing it. So this is my closing remark regarding the panel, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Randerath?
I agree.
Please.
Can I add one thing? I'm just asking you to imagine, I mean, do you imagine any judge having the file in front of themselves with a cyber case? I'm just thinking, what do they do, and how quickly they can act and pass the case through legal system. In these days, it looks almost like impossible, but I think we need to move from that moment here that we are and to go in the much quicker path to achieve cyber justice and to have the criminal elements in cyberspace regulated somehow and addressed, that enforcement is really going to happen. Otherwise, all of these investments, all of these innovations will be left somehow in the air.
So thank you very much. I think there is food for thought for many other conferences, panels on each of the issues you tackled. And of course, cooperation. We all see that it's needed in every aspect you mentioned, and perhaps we must also be more innovative in pushing the cooperation a little bit in more quick pace. So thank you very much, and have a nice evening.
Well, it was a long day. As you said, we have a lot of food for thought, but also food in general. So having said that, I think you will all agree it will be nice to continue our discussion with a glass of wine. And Antigone will guide us to the outpost of the Museum of Modern Art, where we can have a cocktail, and followed by dinner prepared by one of the most talented Greek chefs from the region. So please join us.